The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched high above the gathered representatives. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy sat in their designated sections. The air hummed with translation devices working to turn alien words into something everyone could understand. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Hyun-woo, representing the human race. His dark suit looked simple compared to the flowing robes and strange armor worn by other species. The humans had always been different that way. They dressed plainly and spoke directly. Today, that directness would cost them everything. Council Speaker Velthar raised one of his forearms. The hall fell silent. His blue skin seemed to glow under the chamber lights as he began to read from the official charges. The Human Federation stands accused of excessive militarization. They have built more warships than any other member species. They have established military bases in sectors where no threats exist. They have shown dangerous levels of paranoia about imaginary enemies. Hyun-woo kept his face calm, but his hands were tight fists at his sides. Behind him, in the observation deck, Captain Bo-young watched through the reinforced glass. She commanded one of those warships the Council feared so much. Her crew waited in orbit, ready to escort their people home if this vote went badly. The charges continued. Human forces have repeatedly requested permission to arm neutral space stations. They have pushed for mandatory defense training among civilian populations. They have suggested building warning systems in empty space, claiming threats might come from outside our galaxy. These actions destabilize the peace we have worked so hard to build. The Morvani representative nodded along. His people were gentle farmers who had never fought a war in their recorded history. The idea of weapons scared them more than any enemy ever could. The Kethrun delegate took careful notes. His species loved knowledge but hated conflict. To them, human military research was wasteful and crude. The Yilani trade minister whispered to her aide. Her people cared only about profit and saw human defenses as expensive nonsense. Why spend money on guns when you could build factories instead? Hyun-woo had heard all of this before. For 7 years, he had stood in this same spot trying to explain why humans acted the way they did. His people had learned hard lessons in their history. They knew that peace only lasted when someone was strong enough to protect it. The Human Federation has also shared disturbing intelligence reports, Velthar continued. They claim to have detected unknown energy signatures at the edge of our galaxy. They insist these readings represent a threat requiring immediate military response. Our scientists have reviewed their data and found nothing conclusive. That was the real problem. Human sensors were better than anything the Council had. Human. Computers could spot patterns other species missed. But when humans brought warnings, the Council saw only fear and aggression. They thought humans wanted war because humans prepared for it. Dr. So-jin sat in the human section, tablet full of the very data Velthar dismissed. The energy readings were real. The patterns were growing stronger. Something big was moving in. The dark space between galaxies, and it was heading their way. She had tried to explain this to Council scientists, but they preferred their own comfortable theories. Admiral Taemin stood with his officers near the back of the human section. He commanded the fleet that protected this very station. Human. Ships patrolled the borders while Council species slept safely. Human soldiers died fighting pirates so trade ships could travel in peace. But gratitude was apparently too much to ask for. The vote is called, Velthar announced. All in favor of revoking human membership in the Galactic Council? The Morvani delegate raised his hand first. Then the Kethrun, the Yilani. One by one, every species voted to throw humanity out. Only the human representative kept his hand down. The decision was final. Humans had 6 months to leave Council space. All military agreements were canceled. All defense contracts were void. The other species would handle their own protection from now on. Hyun-woo stepped forward to the speaking platform. The hall waited to hear what he would say. Some expected anger, others hoped for pleading. What they got was something much worse. "We came to you as friends," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "We offered our strength to protect what you had built. We shared our knowledge and our weapons. We asked only to stand beside you against whatever darkness might come." The representatives shifted uncomfortably. This was not the response they expected. "You call us paranoid, but we have learned to watch for danger. You call us aggressive, but we fight only to protect peace. You say we build too many ships, but those ships have kept your trade routes safe. You say we train too many soldiers, but those soldiers have died so yours would not have to." Bo Young felt tears starting in her eyes. She had lost friends keeping Council space secure, good people who believed they were building something better for everyone. "The readings we brought you are real," Hyunwoo continued. "The threat we warned about is coming. When it arrives, and it will arrive, remember this moment. Remember that we offered to stand with you, and you chose to stand alone." He turned and walked toward the exit. The other humans began to follow. 7 years of partnership ended with the sound of footsteps on marble floors. As the human delegation left the great hall, Velthar felt a strange chill. There had been something in the human ambassador's voice, not anger or hurt, but something sadder. It sounded like goodbye. In orbit above the council station, human ships began powering up their engines. Captain Bo Young received her orders from Admiral Taemin. "All units, prepare for departure. Set course for the Andromeda sector. We're going home." The evacuation took 3 months. Human civilians packed up their lives and left worlds they had called home for decades. Human soldiers abandoned bases they had built with their own hands. Human scientists destroyed research that could have helped everyone, rather than leave it for people who had rejected them. The early warning stations went dark one by one. The quantum sensors that watched empty space fell silent. The defensive platforms that guarded against unknown threats were powered down and left to drift. Dr. So-Jin transmitted one final message to the Council archives before her ship jumped to hyperspace. It contained everything she knew about the energy readings, every pattern, every calculation, every prediction about what was coming. She marked it as urgent and sent it to the highest security clearance levels. The message was filed automatically and never read. The officials who might have understood it were too busy celebrating the humans' departure to check their messages. As the last human ship left Council space, peace settled over the galaxy like a warm blanket. The species that remained congratulated themselves on their wisdom. They had removed a dangerous element and could now focus on the things that really mattered: art, science, trade, philosophy. War was for primitives. The enlightened beings of the Galactic Council had evolved beyond such crude thinking. They would prove that civilization could survive without warriors, that peace could exist without strength to protect it. They were wrong about many things, but they would not learn. That until it was far too late. 3 years had passed since the humans left Council space. The galaxy had never been more peaceful. Trade flowed freely between worlds, art flourished in ways never seen before, and conflicts were solved with words instead of weapons. The Council leaders called it the Golden Age of Prosperity. Councillor Kethmal stood before the cameras, his gray skin bright with excitement. Behind him, the last human weapons depot was being torn down by Keth-run workers. They moved carefully, almost afraid to touch the dark metal that had once held enough firepower to destroy a small moon. "Today marks another victory for peaceful civilization," Kethmal announced to the watching galaxy. "Where once weapons of war stood ready to spread violence, we now build a center for learning and wisdom. The old ways of fear and aggression are behind us forever." The workers cheered as another wall came down. They had been nervous about this job at first. Human weapons were strange and powerful, built with technologies the Council barely understood. But the devices had been shut down for years now, cold and harmless as scrap metal. On the former human world of New Terra, Morvani families moved into empty houses. The humans had left everything clean and ready, as if they hoped someone would take good care of what they built. Children played in gardens where human children had played before. Their parents worked in factories that humans had designed to run with minimal waste. The Morvani governor, Morveth, walked through the capital city with wonder. The humans had built everything to last. The power systems could run for centuries without major repairs. The water treatment plants could handle twice the current population. It was as if they had planned for a future they would never see. In the shipyards above the planet, Yelani engineers worked to convert military production lines into civilian factories. They struggled with the human designs at first. Everything was built too strong, with backup systems for the backup systems. Why would a cargo ship need armor plating? Why did a passenger liner require military-grade shields? Trade Minister Yilnara watched the conversion with satisfaction. Her people were practical. They understood that money spent on weapons was money that could not be spent on useful things. These shipyards would now produce luxury cruise ships and cargo haulers. The galaxy would be richer for it. The former human patrol routes had become the safest trade corridors in known space. Pirates who once feared human justice now found easier prey elsewhere. The few who tried their luck against council convoys discovered that mercy worked better than violence. Offered amnesty and honest work, most simply gave up their criminal ways. Border disputes between minor species were solved through meditation sessions led by Kethrun philosophers. Wars that might have dragged on for decades ended with handshakes and trade agreements. The Council's new approach to conflict resolution was being studied by universities across the galaxy. But far from the celebrations and peace talks, automatic sensors continued their lonely watch. Deep space monitoring stations that humans had, built in the empty void between galaxies, still functioned, though no one paid attention to their signals anymore. The Department of Threat Assessment had been dissolved 2 years ago. Its budget moved to cultural programs. The sensors detected many things in those 3 peaceful years. Gravitational waves that moved in impossible patterns. Dark matter concentrations that shifted like living things. Energy signatures that seemed to bend the laws of physics just by existing. All of this data was processed by computer systems and filed away in electronic archives. Dr. Kethlon sometimes looked at these reports during his research into exotic physics. The patterns were interesting from a scientific viewpoint, but hardly urgent. The readings could be explained by any number of natural phenomena. Colliding black holes, neutron star formations, quantum fluctuations in empty space. The universe was full of strange things that meant nothing to civilized beings. Meanwhile, in the Andromeda sector, humanity had built something the Council could never have imagined. Their new worlds were not just colonies, but fortresses. Every city had underground bunkers. Every civilian learned basic combat skills. Every factory could switch to military production within days. Engineer Jinnah worked 16-hour shifts, building the orbital defense platforms around New Earth. The humans had learned their lesson about depending on others for protection. They would never again trust their safety to people who saw strength as a threat. Commander Dong Hyun trained the colonial militia in tactics the Council would have called paranoid. His soldiers learned to fight enemies that bent space and time. They practiced against weapons that existed in multiple dimensions. They prepared for wars that peaceful species could not even imagine. The human settlements were not grim military camps, though. Children still played in parks. Artists still created beautiful things. Scientists still explored the mysteries of the universe. But everything was built with the understanding that peace was temporary and strength was the only guarantee of survival. Admiral Taemin received regular reports from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. The readings were getting stronger. The patterns were becoming more complex. Whatever was moving in the darkness between galaxies was getting closer to inhabited space. He shared this information with the human leadership, but they could do nothing, except prepare. Should they warn the Council? The debate had raged for months in human government meetings. Some argued that they had a moral duty to protect innocent lives, regardless of past injuries. Others believed that the Council had made their choice and must live with the consequences. Dr. So Jin often stared at the data streams from the old sensor network. She had built many of those systems herself, designed them to watch for exactly what they were now detecting. The Council had called her work a waste of resources. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. Back in Council space, the peace celebrations continued. The anniversary of human departure was declared a galactic holiday. Schools taught children about the bad old days when warlike humans had filled space with weapons and fear. The new generation grew up believing that conflict was something primitive species did before they learned to be civilized. The Zilani built monuments to eternal peace on worlds that had once held human military bases. The inscriptions spoke of wisdom triumphing over ignorance, of love conquering hate. They were beautiful works of art that would soon become tombstones for entire civilizations. In the Outer Rim territories, automated mining stations continued their work without supervision. The humans who had once maintained them were gone, replaced by simple AI systems that followed basic programming. When strange readings began appearing in their sensor logs, the computers dutifully recorded everything and sent reports to an office that no longer existed. The warnings piled up in electronic inboxes that nobody checked. Urgent alerts were downgraded to routine notices by systems that had learned to ignore military paranoia. The galaxy's early warning network slowly fell apart through simple neglect, each broken link making the next failure more likely. As the third year of the Golden Age drew to a close, the Galactic Council prepared for their biggest celebration yet, a peace festival that would span 12 worlds and showcase the achievements of enlightened civilization. Artists from every species would display their finest works. Philosophers would debate the nature of harmony. Children would sing songs about the bright future ahead of them. None of them knew that future was about to become very dark indeed. The first ship to disappear was the Prosperity's Dawn. Captain Yevlon had been excited about this mission when he left Morvani space 3 weeks ago. His science team was studying a beautiful nebula at the edge of the galaxy, collecting data about star formation that would help his people understand the universe better. The last message from the Prosperity's Dawn came at Aero 347 ship time. Captain Yevlon's voice sounded confused as he spoke into the communication array. Control, we're reading some strange energy patterns near the nebula. The colors don't match anything in our databases. The computer keeps saying the readings are impossible. There was a pause. Then his voice came back more worried. Wait, something's happening to the nebula itself. It's changing shape. No, not changing, folding, like someone is bending space itself. This can't be right. Space doesn't work that way. The transmission broke into static for 30 seconds. When it cleared, Yevlon was shouting, "Emergency! Emergency! There are structures forming out of nothing. They're not on our sensors, but we can see them. They're huge. They're reaching toward us. The geometry is all wrong. Space is breaking apart." Then silence. The Morvani government sent 3 rescue ships to find the Prosperity's Dawn. They arrived at the coordinates to find debris floating in space, but debris like nothing they had ever seen. The metal pieces had grown strange crystals that pulsed with dark light. The crystals seemed to exist both inside and outside normal space at the same time, hurting the eyes of anyone who looked at them directly. Dr. Kethalon arrived with the investigation team a week later. He had brought every scanning device the Council possessed, eager to solve this scientific mystery. The crystals defied every test he tried. They absorbed energy but gave nothing back. They responded to gravity but also seemed to create their own gravitational fields. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to be growing. The investigation team took samples back to the Council's main research station. Within hours, the samples had doubled in size. Within days, they had begun forming complex geometric patterns. That made no sense to Council science. The researchers tried to communicate with the crystals using mathematics and light patterns, but got no response. Then came the second disappearance. The trade ship Golden Current vanished while carrying luxury goods from Yelani space to the outer colonies. This time, the rescue teams found not just debris but parts of the ship that had been changed. The cargo holds had been turned inside out, existing in impossible dimensions that the scanning equipment could not properly measure. The third ship. To vanish was Scholar's Quest, a Keth-run research vessel studying ancient ruins on a distant world. The rescue team found the planet itself had been altered. The ancient cities were still there, but they now extended into spaces that shouldn't exist. Walking through the ruins made people sick, as if their brains could not process what they were seeing. Counselor Velthar called an emergency session to address the disappearances. The Great Hall was full of worried representatives asking questions. Nobody could answer. What was causing these events? Were they connected? Was this some kind of new weapon being used by unknown enemies? The debates went in circles. The Morvani wanted to send more research ships to understand the phenomenon. The Yelani demanded increased security for their trade routes. The Keth-rune suggested these might be natural events that looked dangerous but were actually harmless. The Zilani proposed forming a committee to study the problem. Nobody mentioned the human warnings from 5 years ago. Nobody remembered the data about strange energy readings from the edge of the galaxy. The reports Dr. Sojin had filed were buried in electronic archives that no one bothered to search, but someone did remember. In the Andromeda sector, Dr. Young-Sik watched the quantum echo data streaming in from humanity's deep space monitoring network. The patterns were exactly what the old sensors had been detecting for years. Whatever was happening to the Council ships, it was connected to the entities humans had been trying to warn everyone about. He brought his findings to Admiral Subin, who stared at the data with a mixture of anger and sadness. "It's starting," she said quietly. "Everything we predicted is coming true." Captain Wu Jin, who served as liaison to the outer colonies, looked at the reports with growing horror. "How many ships have they lost so far?" 6 confirmed missing. "Probably more they haven't announced yet," Dr. Young-Sik replied. "The pattern is accelerating. Whatever these things are, they're learning from each encounter." The human leadership faced a terrible choice. They could try to warn the Council again, but their previous attempts had been ignored or deleted by automated systems. They could send military aid, but the Council had made it clear they didn't want human help. They could do nothing and let the galaxy burn. The debates in the human government were intense but brief. Some argued that humanity owed the Council nothing after being cast out like criminals. Others believed that innocent people shouldn't suffer for their leaders' mistakes. In the end, they chose a middle path. A single encrypted message was sent to the Council's emergency communication system. "The harvesters have awakened. We warned you this would happen. Your people are in danger. Evacuate the Outer Rim territories immediately. This is only the beginning." The message was automatically flagged as suspicious by security systems designed to prevent human propaganda from reaching Council networks. It was deleted without being read. More ships began to disappear. The pattern was always the same. Strange readings, confused final transmissions, then silence followed by the discovery of impossible debris. The rescue teams started finding larger structures made from the transformed ships, geometric shapes that seemed to serve unknown purposes. Dr. Kethlon worked day and night trying to understand what was happening. The crystal samples in his lab had grown into complex formations that pulsed with rhythm like a heartbeat. Sometimes he thought he could hear whispers coming from them, mathematical concepts that his mind couldn't quite grasp. One night, alone in his laboratory, Kethlon made a breakthrough that filled him with terror. The crystals weren't just growing randomly. They were building something. a communication device that reached across impossible distances to something waiting in the darkness between galaxies. He rushed to contact the council leadership, but before he could send his report, the crystals in his lab suddenly went silent. The pulsing stopped. The whispers ended. For a moment, Kethlon felt relief. Then he realized what the silence meant. Whatever the crystals had been talking to had finished listening. Now it was time for it to talk back. On the edge of council space, automated monitoring stations that had been maintained by human engineers began detecting massive gravitational distortions. Structures the size of moons were forming in empty space, built from materials that existed in more dimensions than normal matter could handle. The harvesters had been sleeping for 1,000,000 years, waiting for the galaxy to develop enough intelligent life to be worth consuming. Now they were awake, and they were hungry. The golden age of peace was about to end in ways the Council could never have imagined. The luminous path was the pride of the Yelani merchant fleet. 3 kilometers long and carrying 2 million passengers to new colonies, it represented everything the Council stood for: trade, exploration, and peaceful cooperation between species. Captain Riltar had been honored to command such a beautiful ship on its maiden voyage. That honor became a nightmare when the ship encountered something that should not exist. The final transmission from the luminous path was recovered 3 days later from a quantum emergency beacon. Captain Riltar's voice was barely recognizable, broken by terror and confusion. "This is Captain Riltar. I don't know what we are anymore. Something has found us, something that makes space fold like paper." The recording was filled with sounds that hurt to hear. Metal screaming as it was twisted into impossible shapes, energy patterns that made the ship's computers crash just by being recorded. In the background, 2 million voices cried out in languages that no longer sounded like anything spoken by living beings. "The passengers are changing," Riltar whispered. "Their minds are being harvested, stored in crystals that exist in too many dimensions. They're still alive, but they're not in their bodies anymore. The entities are taking their thoughts and using them to build something huge." The transmission ended with Riltar screaming as his own consciousness was pulled from his body. When the rescue fleet arrived at the last known coordinates of the luminous path, they found something that broke their understanding of reality. The ship was still there, but it had been transformed into a structure that folded through dimensions the eye couldn't follow. What had once been passenger decks were now crystalline chambers that pulsed with harvested thoughts. 2 million Yelani had been turned into living components of an alien machine. Admiral Kolves of the Council Defense Fleet stared at the transformed ship through his viewing screen. His military training had prepared him for many things, but not for enemies that treated the laws of physics as suggestions. His weapons couldn't target something that existed in folded space. His shields couldn't protect against attacks that came from directions that didn't exist. The entities the humans had called harvesters were no longer hiding. Massive structures began appearing throughout council space, built from the matter and consciousness of consumed civilizations. They weren't ships in any sense the council understood. They were living geometric nightmares that harvested entire worlds, like farmers harvesting grain. The first major battle happened at the Nexus Gate, a strategic choke point between the inner and outer territories. Admiral Kolves led 50 of the Council's finest ships against 3 harvester constructs. The battle lasted less than an hour. Council weapons passed harmlessly through enemies that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Harvester technology turned solid matter into geometric puzzles that followed alien mathematics. Captain Ylsera watched her crew being systematically converted into crystalline matrices that would serve the harvesters for millions of years. "All ships retreat," Admiral Kolves ordered. But retreat was impossible when the enemy could fold space to trap their victims. The Unity's Promise, the Council's most advanced battleship, was transformed into a beautiful spiral structure that existed in 17 dimensions. Its crew became part of a computational system designed to calculate the optimal patterns for consuming galaxies. The survivors who escaped brought news that terrified the Council leadership. These weren't raiders or pirates or even a hostile alien empire. These were universe-level threats that consumed civilizations the way animals consumed food. They had technology that made Council science look like cave paintings. Emergency sessions were called every day as the scope of the disaster became clear. The peaceful species of the Council had no weapons capable of fighting enemies that could reshape reality itself. Their exploration ships became easy targets. Their trade vessels were converted into harvester technology with terrifying efficiency. Councillor Velthar authorized the deployment of every military asset the Council possessed. The results were catastrophic. Weapons designed for exploration and trade were useless against entities that harvested the fundamental forces of the universe. Defensive systems built for conflicts between civilized species couldn't comprehend enemies that existed outside normal spacetime. Reports began coming in from across the galaxy. The militant Karathi Empire had fallen in less than a week, their warrior culture no match for foes that could turn their own strength against them. The technical masters of Drex had been consumed so quickly that their distress signals were still reaching other worlds days after their entire civilization had been harvested. The pattern was always the same. The harvesters would appear without warning, often emerging from folded space that their victims couldn't detect. Military forces would be consumed first, their technology and fighting knowledge absorbed and improved. Civilian populations would be harvested more slowly, their consciousness stored in crystalline matrices, while their bodies were converted into raw materials. Dr. Kethlon worked frantically to understand the enemy's technology, but every breakthrough only revealed how hopeless their situation had become. The harvesters weren't just advanced aliens. They were something that had evolved beyond normal existence. Creatures that fed on the thoughts and dreams of entire civilizations. The crystal samples in his laboratory had grown into a massive structure that whispered secrets about the universe in mathematics, too complex for organic minds to understand. Sometimes Kethlon could almost grasp the concepts, but doing so felt like standing at the edge of an infinite abyss of knowledge that would drive him insane. In desperation, the Council attempted to contact their former military allies. The warrior, species that had protected Council space for centuries, had all fallen to the harvesters. Their advanced weapons and battle experience meant nothing against enemies that could rewrite the laws of physics. The Council faced the terrible truth that they had spent decades avoiding. All their peaceful philosophy meant nothing when faced with entities that saw civilization as a resource to be consumed. Their art and culture would be preserved only as data in alien computers, studied by minds that had no concept of beauty or meaning. Then someone remembered the humans. It was Councillor Morveth who first suggested it during an emergency session. His people were gentle farmers who had never hurt anyone, but even they could see that conventional thinking had failed. "What about the humans?" he asked quietly. "They warned us about this. They prepared for enemies we couldn't imagine. Maybe they know how to fight these things." The suggestion created an uproar. The humans had been cast out for their aggressive nature. They had been branded as warmongers and paranoids. How could the Council ask for help from people they had rejected and humiliated? But as more worlds fell to the harvesters, pride became a luxury the Council could no longer afford. The entities were consuming entire star systems now, turning planets into geometric sculptures that served incomprehensible purposes. Billions of lives were being harvested every day. Councillor Velthar stood before the communication array, his pride broken and his voice shaking with desperation. The words came hard, but they came. "To the Human Federation, we were wrong. We need your help. Please." The message traveled across the void to reach humanity in their new home. The question That remained was whether the people they had cast out would still be willing to risk everything to save the galaxy that had rejected them. The message from Counselor Velthar reached the human command ship Indomitable at 1400 hours, ship time. Admiral Taemin listened to the desperate plea in silence, surrounded by the officers who had once served alongside Council forces. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything they had endured. "We were wrong. We need your help. Please." Captain Bo Young, now an admiral herself, spoke first. "How many worlds have they lost since this started?" 14 major systems confirmed destroyed, replied Dr. Sojin, now Director of Human Defense. Intelligence. Probably twice that number if we count the ones they haven't reported yet. The harvesters are consuming everything in their path. General Kyung-ho leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. They had 7 years to listen to our warnings. 7 years to prepare, while we begged them to take the threat seriously. How many of our people should die cleaning up their mess? Kackers. Debate that followed was intense, but respectful. These were people who had sacrificed everything for the idea that civilization was worth protecting, even when civilization didn't want their protection. The question wasn't whether they could help, but whether they should. Admiral Bo Young argued for intervention. There are billions of innocent civilians in council space, children who never voted to cast us out, artists and scientists who just want to create beautiful things. Do we let them die because their leaders made bad choices? And what about our children? General Kyung-ho replied. What about our artists and scientists? We've lost 60% of our military strength just getting to this point. If we commit to a full rescue operation, we'll be throwing away everything we've built. Dr. Sojin provided the tactical analysis that everyone dreaded hearing. Our technology is still superior to anything the Council or the Harvesters have encountered. Our quantum weapons can actually damage their structures. Our adaptive shields can resist their conversion beams, at least for a while. She paused, looking at the data on her tablet. But they learn fast. Every time we engage them, they adapt to our tactics. We might be able to save 10% of the remaining Council population, maybe 15% if we're lucky. The cost would be enormous. President Nari had the final decision. She stood at the observation deck of the Indomitable, looking out at the human fleet that represented everything her people had built after their exile. Hundreds of ships bristling with weapons the Council had feared, crewed by soldiers the Council had called too aggressive for galactic peace. "We go," she said finally, "not because they deserve it, not because they'll thank us. We go because someone has to stand against the darkness, and we're the only ones left who can." The human fleet that jumped to Council space was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships that existed partially in hyperspace to avoid Harvester detection. Weapons that could target enemies across multiple dimensions. Soldiers trained to fight entities that defied the normal rules of existence. Admiral Tae-min chose Zalani Prime for their first major engagement. The Harvester conversion of the planet was 30% complete, with geometric structures growing from the surface like crystalline cancer. Orbital stations had been transformed into impossible shapes that harvested energy directly from the system's star. The Battle of Zalani Prime lasted 6 hours and changed everything both sides understood about war. Human quantum torpedoes actually damaged Harvester constructs, their warheads designed to explode across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Human adaptive shielding resisted conversion beams that had effortlessly destroyed Council fleets. For the first time since the invasion began, the Harvesters faced enemies who could fight back. Admiral Dong-hyun commanded the evacuation fleet that swept through the chaos of battle, collecting every Zalani civilian they could find. Transport. Ships designed for rapid deployment moved through folded space, staying ahead of Harvester pursuit. The human pilots flew with a precision born of years preparing for exactly this kind of impossible war. But the Harvesters learned quickly. By the 4th hour of battle, they had adapted to human weapon frequencies. By the 5th hour, they had developed countermeasures for human shielding. By the 6th hour, Admiral Dong Yun watched his battle group being systematically dismantled by enemies who now understood how humans fought. The evacuation ships managed to save 3 million Zilani civilians before the quantum corridors collapsed. It was a fraction of the planet's population, but it was 3 million lives that would otherwise have been harvested and stored in crystalline matrices. As the human fleet retreated, Admiral Tae Min sent a message to the remaining Council worlds. "We bought you time. Use it to evacuate. Run to the edge of the galaxy, past where the harvesters hunt. We'll cover your retreat as long as we can." What followed was 8 months of fighting withdrawal that became legend among the survivors. Human fleets served as rear guard while massive refugee convoys fled toward the galactic rim. Entire species packed their most precious belongings and abandoned worlds their ancestors had called home for thousands of years. The humans paid a terrible price for every day they bought. The harvesters adapted to each new tactic, each new weapon, each new defensive strategy. Human ships that had seemed invincible at the start of the war became death traps as the enemy learned to counter every advantage. Captain Wu Jin died defending a Morvani evacuation convoy, his ship converted into a geometric puzzle while he transmitted firing solutions to the rest of his squadron. Commander Jinnah sacrificed herself and her engineering team to overload a quantum reactor, taking 3 harvester constructs with her in an explosion that folded space for light years in every direction. Of the 40 species that had comprised the Galactic Council, humanity managed to save remnant populations of 12. The rest were consumed, their consciousness harvested to fuel harvester construction projects that would serve incomprehensible purposes for millions of years. The survivors established refugee camps in the void between galaxies, far from the hunting grounds the harvesters preferred. Humans worked alongside the aliens they had rescued, sharing food, shelter, and hope for some kind of future. It was there that Counselor Morveth approached President Nari with the question that had haunted him since the evacuation began. "Why?" he asked simply. "After everything we did to you, after we cast you out and called you monsters, why did you come back?" President Nari looked out at the refugee camps, where human children played alongside alien children, where human engineers worked with alien scientists to build new homes from salvaged materials. "Because someone had to," she said. "Because that's what strength is for, not to conquer or control, but to protect those who can't protect themselves." She turned to face the Morvani counselor directly. "Even when they don't understand it, even when they don't appreciate it, even when they call you monsters for being willing to do what's necessary." The Galactic Council was gone. Most of galactic civilization had been consumed. But in the darkness between galaxies, something new was being built. A civilization that understood the price of peace, that knew strength and compassion were not opposites, but partners. The refugees would rebuild, wiser this time. They would be ready when the harvesters stirred again. And when that time came, they would not stand alone. Humanity would be there, as they always had been, standing guard against the darkness that waited beyond the stars. The galaxy had learned too late that peace without strength was merely a pause between disasters. But the lesson was learned, and it would not be forgotten again.